Welcome to Adventures in Freeze Drying, and today we are going to do something new that I've never done before with zucchini. Spring has sprung. I'm in Iowa, so just because it's officially spring, we are nowhere near planting, but I love to grow zucchini in the summer, and zucchini is kind of feast or famine. You'll have none and then you'll have 30. So I'm looking for some unique ways to use that zucchini and get it freeze dried. So I don't have anything going to waste, and you can only give so many zucchinis away before your friends, family, neighbors don't want any more. So let's go ahead and start this zucchini soup and see if it works in the freeze dryer and how it turns out. The first thing I need to do is chop up 2.5 pounds of zucchini to cook. I am choosing to leave the skins on. I've washed them really well. Once I grow my own zucchini, I wouldn't worry about it because I know that I don't use any pesticides in my gardening. If you use pesticides in your gardening, you'll need to make sure that you get those off of your zucchini. So let's go ahead and get all 2.5 pounds of zucchini chopped up. Next, I'm going to chop up 1 medium onion and add it to my zucchini in the bowl over here. The last thing I need to chop up and add over here are 4 cloves of garlic. So we'll go ahead and get those chopped. The last prep item before I start cooking would be 1/3 cup of fresh basil leaves chopped. I don't have fresh basil right now, but I froze all my basil at the end of last season. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of crunch it here because that will break it up some before I start to cooking it, and get my 1/3 cup of basil out of my frozen basil from my freezer. And I think this will work just fine. It's got that full-bodied flavor like it's fresh, not like anything that you get dehydrated from the grocery store. Your own freeze-dried basil may also work in this fine. I just haven't freeze-dried any basil yet. I'm working from a recipe that would have you use some oil and some chicken broth or chicken stock. I'm not going to use any oil for cooking up my veggies. I'm going to go ahead and just use a little bit of that chicken broth to brown up and cook up the zucchini and onion and garlic, and then add the rest of the broth to make my soup. You don't have to use chicken broth. You are totally able to use a veggie broth instead, and that would keep this completely vegan. So I'm just gonna keep trying to avoid that oil. A little bit of oil really should be okay, but I'm just gonna avoid it because I know using just some broth to brown this up works just fine. I'm going to put my pan on a medium-high heat. Add a little bit of chicken broth to the bottom of my pan to help keep stuff from sticking. And then I'm going to dump all of this in here and cook it for about 4 to 6 minutes. I'll probably go more for the 6-ish minutes to make sure it's well done. The next step is to add your 4 cups of broth. I am using chicken, but you can definitely use veggie broth. Keeping this over medium-high heat, you want to bring this all to a boil. So I'm going to put my lid back on and let this come to a boil. Now that the soup has come to a boil, we'll reduce the heat to medium-low and let this simmer for 15 minutes undisturbed. While the soup is cooking, I'm going to go ahead and work on a garnish that it says you should top this with. It calls for heavy cream to be poured on top of the soup, just a little bit to help give it, I don't know, some flavor, some creaminess. Heavy cream does not freeze dry well. However, cream cheese does freeze dry well, and you can add more water when you're rehydrating it to have it be a little bit runny, and I'm guessing that'll be a perfect topping for the soup. So I'm going to get a brick of cream cheese ready to go in the freeze dryer with my soup. Now I'm going to simply cover this with one of my lids and get this in the freezer downstairs, and then I'll get back to finishing up the soup. My soup has been simmering for 15 minutes. I'm going to add my 1/3 cup of basil. Again, should be fresh. I am using my frozen basil, homegrown basil that I put in at the end of the season into my freezer. And then you can salt and pepper this to taste. I am not a huge salt person, so I'm not going to add a ton of salt right now. I'm going to stir this together quickly. And then I'm going to go ahead and remove this from the heat. While this is still hot, I'm going to go ahead and use my immersion blender to make this smooth. Even though this is still super hot, before I clean up my immersion blender, I want to make sure that I'm happy with the salt and the pepper that I added, or any other spices that I want to add at this time, so I can use that immersion blender to mix it back up. That's actually really good. I am happy with my spices. That's a very good soup. Better than I was thinking it was going to be. This is surprising. So we're going to let this cool and then we'll get it trayed up. My soup is completely cooled off and I've poured it into my large measuring cup, and I have exactly 8 cups of soup in here. So I am going to put this into 2 medium trays, or you could just do a medium tray and have some left over. Large tray again, it's going to be more than 1 large tray. I'm going to call this 8 servings. The recipe says it is 6 servings. I'm going with 8 because 8 and 40 play nice together, because I'm planning to use dividers to help me pre-portion my soup. I think I might be turning this into a soup in a jar, and so it'll be super helpful if I already have this pre-portioned for myself. I do want this to freeze solid before I even put this into my freeze dryer. I try not to put that kind of wear and tear on my freeze dryer. So I'm just going to use some of my locking stackers and put that on top and go get this frozen solid. And the next time we'll see this is when it's coming out of the freeze dryer. After roughly 26 hours, my soup is completed and so is my cream cheese. So let's go ahead and get this packaged up and then we'll go ahead and do a taste test. I was exactly today's years old when I discovered this handy dandy. It's a little Pampered Chef spatula. Fits perfect in my 40 set dividers in my medium tray. So your large dividers might have a little bigger spot when set to 40, but in the medium, this is the perfect size for getting into those to help get food out. So handy dandy little hint there. Because these squares are really fragile and I'm worried when I put these in my bag they're not going to hold together, I'm going to get the mass of 10 of these squares, which is going to be 1 serving for me. It would give me 8 servings for this batch of soup. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Gives me a mass of 13 grams. I'm going to write that down. I'm going to do this 1 more time, maybe even 2 more times, so I can get an average mass of 10 squares. After weighing 10 squares 3 times, 2 of the times was 12 grams, 1 of the times was 13 grams, so 12 to 13 grams of just the powder will be equal to 1 serving of my soup. One really quick shortcut for you. One of the reasons I like these bags from Freeze Drying Supplies is that they have that zip top on them, and they're gusseted, but the soup, being super airy and styrofoam-like, takes up a lot of space that it doesn't need to take up. So rather than using a Ziploc bag, I am just going to use my rolling pin, and I can let some of that air out as I want to. But I can powder it right in this bag without having to go from a Ziploc back into a Mylar. I can crunch this with my hand. It is so styrofoam. Let more air out, crunch it some more. But then no transfer from a Ziploc to your Mylar bag. When I'm all done, I can seal across the top here, make sure I get it clean so I get a good seal, and it won't be a problem. The soup recipe said that you should really top the soup with some heavy cream, which we know doesn't freeze dry well. So I freeze dried some cream cheese, which is super light and airy and is falling apart almost as I'm trying to pull it apart. So, I mean, it's just falling apart. I'm going to go ahead and get a mass of this and divide that mass by 8 so I know how much to do for each serving. I made some little pouches out of a fuller Mylar bag, and I'll write on here that it's 2 servings of cream cheese. And then I heat sealed, which they may not be perfect heat seals, but they're going to go in this Mylar with the soup with an oxygen absorber, so I'm actually not too worried about it. That way I've got it separated from the soup if I want to mix it and add it on top. In the jar, it's just already going to be in here, so it'll mix with the soup. And I'm going to go ahead and get this finished up, and then we'll do our taste test. I've added 1 cup of boiling water to my measuring cup. I'm going to assume this is going to take about 1 cup of water because I had 8 1-cup servings. I'm going to add about 3/4 of this right away. I'm going to reserve a little bit for later, just in case I'm off on my measurements. This was kind of a runny soup to begin with. And I also have that cream cheese in here to add some flavor. It was meant to be garnished with heavy cream. I went ahead and covered this. We're going to let it sit for about 2 minutes and then we'll check on it. There's a little less than 1/4 cup of water back in this little measuring bowl. So I used just over 3/4 cup of water when I first poured this in here. So again, this could definitely be a soup in a jar that's ready to go. That's just add water. Super easy with those dividers to get the same amount in each jar, or you can do it by mass. Found out those squares were pretty equal when I was measuring it out. So I would feel comfortable just adding 10 squares to my jar and calling them the same. This is a hair thicker than when I first made the soup, but I think I like this thicker consistency better just for my own palate. So let's give this a taste test. My soup is fully rehydrated. It smells really good. And it tastes wonderful. I really like it with that cream cheese mixed in with it. Gives it a very Italian taste. Definitely think you could add some Parmesan on top if you wanted to add a little more flavor. But if you need something to do with your leftover zucchini, this would be a great thing to do with that zucchini, so it's usable and just something different. I also think you could do this like as a cold soup before a meal as well. It would not necessarily have to be a hot soup because it's pretty light being made out of zucchini. Thank you so much for joining me on Adventures in Freeze Drying. We'll see you next time.